What happens when a CEO walks into his own diner and hears his waitress sobbing in the kitchen? Jacob Reed built his diner chain from the ground up, believing his staff was treated like family. But after hearing whispers of bad service, rude staff, and employees quitting, he decided to see the truth for himself. Disguised as a regular customer, he expected slow service. But he never expected to hear a waitress begging for a break through tears. That was the moment Jacob knew. Someone was about to lose their job. Jacob Reed sat behind the wheel of his car, staring at the neon-lit diner through the windshield. His diner. One of 13 locations he had built from scratch over the last decade. From the outside, it looked fine. Clean, well-maintained, business as usual. But the whispers, the complaints, the nagging feeling in his gut told him otherwise. His regional managers assured him everything was fine. Nothing to worry about, boss, just the usual ups and downs. But Jacob didn't build his company on blind trust. Numbers don't lie, and the recent spike in customer complaints and employee turnover painted a different picture. So, he decided to find out the truth for himself. Dressed in a worn-out hoodie, faded jeans, and thick-rimmed glasses, he barely recognized himself in the rearview mirror. His neatly trimmed beard was now scruffy, his signature polished look replaced with the appearance of an everyday customer. No one here had ever met him in person. To them, he was just another patron looking for a meal. With a deep breath, Jacob pushed open the door and stepped inside. The moment he walked in, Jacob felt it. The tension. The diner was clean, but something was off. The warm, welcoming energy he had envisioned when he started this business was missing. The walls looked dull, the booths slightly worn. Customers sat in small groups, but instead of lively chatter, there was a noticeable stiffness in the air. A young waitress hurried toward him, her name tag reading Megan. She looked exhausted, her ponytail slightly messy, dark circles under her eyes. Yet, she still forced a smile. "Hi there, welcome." Her voice was cheerful, but something about it felt strained. "Can I get you started with something to drink?" Jacob studied her carefully. She was trying. Hard. "Just coffee, thanks," he said, sliding into a booth near the window. Megan nodded and hurried off. As he waited, Jacob took in his surroundings. It didn't take long for him to see what was wrong. Megan was juggling too much. He watched as she moved from table to table, refilling drinks, taking orders, and clearing plates, all with no help. The other employees looked just as drained, their movements sluggish. Then, bang! The sudden slam of a kitchen door made Jacob look up. A short, stocky man with a stained apron and a permanent scowl stood behind the counter, barking orders at the staff. "Megan! What's taking so long? You're falling behind again." Her shoulders stiffened. "Coming right up," she called back, her voice cracking slightly. Jacob frowned. Rick. He didn't need an introduction. He already knew. This had to be the manager in charge. Megan flinched at his tone but kept working, moving faster now, almost frantic. Jacob clenched his jaw. This was not how his company was supposed to operate. At the booth behind him, a family murmured complaints about the slow service. 2 teenagers whispered about how rude the manager had been earlier. Jacob exhaled slowly, forcing himself to remain calm. This wasn't just a bad shift. This was a toxic workplace. Jacob had just taken his first bite of his burger when he heard it. A muffled sound from the kitchen. He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. The soft, broken sobs of a woman. His grip on the fork tightened. It was Megan. "I'm trying my best, okay?" Her voice cracked through the thin walls. "I haven't had a break in 6 hours, and I'm doing everything I can." Then came Rick's cold, dismissive response. "If you can't handle the pressure, maybe you're in the wrong job." Jacob's stomach twisted. That was it. That was the moment everything changed. He wasn't here as a CEO anymore. He was here as a man who just watched someone break under the weight of an abusive boss. He slid out of the booth, leaving his half-eaten meal behind. His disguise didn't matter anymore. Someone was about to learn exactly who Jacob Reed was. Jacob Reed sat frozen, his burger untouched, his fingers tightening around the fork. He could hear it. The unmistakable sound of someone crying. The muffled sobs seeped through the thin walls of the kitchen, raw and broken. Then came Megan's voice, shaking, barely holding itself together. "I haven't had a break in 6 hours. I'm trying my best." Her words hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. A cold, dismissive voice followed. "Rick, if you can't handle the pressure, maybe you should quit." Jacob's fork slammed down onto the plate with a sharp clang. A few nearby customers turned their heads at the noise, but Jacob was already rising from his booth. That was it. That was his breaking point. This wasn't just bad management. This was abuse. Pushing past the counter, Jacob strode straight into the kitchen, ignoring the startled glances from the staff. The room went still. A young cook, Connor, if Jacob remembered correctly, froze mid-motion, a spatula clutched in his hand. Another worker, a busboy, stared wide-eyed at the sudden intrusion. And then there was Megan. She stood with trembling hands, wiping at her tear-streaked face with the back of her sleeve. Her eyes darted down in humiliation, avoiding everyone. Rick, the aggressive, red-faced manager, whirled around, his expression twisting in irritation. "What the hell are you doing back here?" Rick barked. "This is employees only." Jacob cut him off coldly. "She looks like she needs a break. Let her sit for 5 minutes." The silence was thick. Megan's head snapped up in shock. Rick's face twisted into a sneer. "We don't have time for breaks." Jacob didn't blink. "There's always time to treat people with respect." Connor, the young cook, shifted uneasily. He looked like he wanted to say something, but fear kept him quiet. Jacob saw it. The same hesitation, the same fear of speaking up against authority. Connor exhaled sharply, then nervously spoke up. "She hasn't had a drink of water all shift." Megan stiffened, her eyes darting to Connor in shock. Rick's glare snapped to the cook. "Stay out of it, Connor," Rick barked. "She's an adult. If she wanted a break, she'd ask for one." Jacob's fists clenched. That was a lie. Employees like Megan didn't ask for breaks because they knew what the answer would be. They had been beaten down by toxic leadership for too long. Jacob took a slow step forward, his stance solid, unshaken. Rick still had no idea who he was talking to. Rick crossed his arms, clearly unfazed. "Look, buddy, I don't know what you think you're doing, but we run a tight ship here. If you can't handle the pace, you don't belong." Jacob let the words sink in. The audacity, the arrogance. This was his company, his brand, the business he built from the ground up. And here was this pathetic excuse for a leader, running his employees into the ground and treating them like disposable parts. Jacob's voice dropped, low and firm. "And who put you in charge of deciding who belongs?" Rick scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, give me a break. You have no idea how this business works." Jacob's lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. "Oh, I know exactly how this business works." Rick let out a sarcastic laugh. "Yeah? And what makes you think you know anything about running a diner?" Jacob stared him down, the weight of his authority finally pressing into the air. Then, calmly, deliberately, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet. Connor and Megan watched curiously, still confused. Rick just huffed impatiently. But then, Jacob flipped open the wallet. A company ID badge sat behind the clear plastic cover. Jacob's full name, his title, Jacob Reed, CEO, Reed's Family Diners. The color drained from Rick's face. Dead. Silence. Megan's eyes widened in shock. Connor let out a stunned breath. Rick's jaw worked, his brain scrambling to recover. Jacob let the moment drag on, watching as realization finally dawned. "Surprise," Jacob said coolly. Rick stumbled over his words. I didn't realize." Jacob tilted his head. "No, you didn't. Because if you had, you wouldn't be treating my employees like garbage." Rick opened his mouth to argue, but Jacob cut him off. "You want to talk about who belongs here, Rick?" His voice turned cold. "Because from where I'm standing, it's not you." Megan inhaled sharply. Connor grinned, just a little. "Rick?" He just stood there, frozen. Because everything had just changed. And Jacob wasn't done yet. The diner falls silent. The tension in the air is thick enough to cut with a knife. Jacob Reed stands firm, his ID badge displayed like a final verdict. The customers, staff, and even the cooks in the kitchen stare in shock, their eyes bouncing between Rick and the man they had unknowingly been serving. Megan takes a small step back, her fingers gripping the notepad she had been using to take orders. Connor freezes at his station, his expression unreadable but his clenched fists giving away his emotions. The moment stretches on, and for the first time that afternoon, Rick doesn't have anything to say. The once arrogant manager swallows hard, his face shifting from defiant to pale in a matter of seconds. His lips part, but no sound comes out. It's as if his brain is struggling to catch up with what just happened. "Mr. Reed," Rick finally chokes out, forcing a weak chuckle. I had no idea you were coming today." Jacob tilts his head slightly, studying the man in front of him. His expression remains calm, but there's an unmistakable sharpness in his voice. "And why would you? You were too busy running my diner into the ground to notice." Rick clears his throat, shifting on his feet. "Sir, I think there's been a misunderstanding." He gestures vaguely toward Megan. "She's a great worker, really, but you know how it is during rush hour. Things get stressful, people make mistakes. I was just trying to keep things running smoothly." Jacob raises an eyebrow, his patience already thin. "By yelling at your staff? By making a waitress work 6 hours straight without a break? By belittling employees in front of customers?" His voice remains even, but the weight of his words hangs heavy in the room. Rick forces another laugh, but it's hollow. "Look, maybe I was a little harsh today, but it's not like I treat them like that all the time." Connor speaks up before Jacob can respond. "That's a lie," he says quietly but firmly. "It's like this every day." Rick turns sharply toward him, his face twisting with irritation. "Stay out of this, Connor." "No," Jacob interrupts. "He won't. In fact, I want to hear everything he has to say." Connor hesitates for only a second before taking a deep breath. "Rick treats us like garbage. Megan gets the worst of it because she's one of the best workers here. But we all get pushed around. No breaks, no respect. And if we complain, we get threatened with losing our jobs." Jacob exhales through his nose, his anger bubbling just beneath the surface. He turns back to Rick. "And you call that leadership?" Rick shifts again, but his usual confidence is nowhere to be found. I was just doing what I had to do." Jacob takes a step closer, his voice lower now, more deliberate. "You were abusing your position. You were turning this place into a miserable, toxic workplace. And worst of all, you were doing it under my name." Rick takes a shaky breath. "I can fix this, I swear. Just give me another chance." Jacob shakes his head. "You had your chance. You're done here." Silence. Rick blinks. What? "You're fired," Jacob states simply. "Effective immediately." A collective gasp ripples through the diner. Megan's mouth falls open slightly, her eyes darting between Rick and Jacob. Connor exhales, his posture finally relaxing just a little. Rick's shock morphs into anger. "You can't just walk in here and fire me." Jacob crosses his arms. "Actually, I can. This is my diner, and I refuse to let someone like you ruin it." Rick clenches his jaw, his face turning red with rage. "This place will fall apart without me." Jacob chuckles, but there's no humor in it. "No, Rick. It'll finally have a chance to thrive without you." Rick looks around, searching for support, but none comes. The cooks won't meet his eyes. The customers are whispering among themselves. Even Megan, the waitress he had bullied for months, stands tall, her expression firm. Defeated, Rick lets out a scoff, yanks off his apron, and throws it onto the counter. "Fine," he spits, "but don't expect this place to survive without me." Jacob doesn't react as Rick storms past him, shoving the diner door open with so much force that it rattles on its hinges. The moment he's gone, the silence lingers for a beat longer, until a single voice speaks up from one of the booths. "About damn time," an elderly customer mutters. A few customers chuckle. A couple of them even clap. Megan exhales, her hands trembling as she tucks her notepad into her apron. Jacob turns to her and Connor. You two, meet me after your shift. We have a lot to discuss. Megan hesitates. Are we in trouble? Jacob shakes his head. Number. But things are about to change. Connor straightens up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Megan nods slowly. Jacob glances around the diner, his jaw set. This was just the beginning. Tomorrow, he was coming back. And this time, he wasn't just going to observe. He was going to rebuild. Jacob leads Rick into the small, cluttered office at the back of the diner, shutting the door behind them. The air is thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on both men. Rick shifts uncomfortably, his bravado from earlier fading under Jacob's piercing gaze. Jacob doesn't sit. He stands firm, arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. Rick, on the other hand, fidgets, his fingers drumming nervously on the desk. He clears his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. Look, Mr. Reed, Rick starts, forcing a laugh that falls flat. I understand you're upset, but I think we're blowing this way out of proportion. This is just how things run in a busy diner. It's high pressure. Sometimes you gotta be tough to keep everything in order. Jacob narrows his eyes. Do you have any idea how out of line you've been? His voice is low, calm, but there's an edge to it. A quiet fury that makes Rick swallow hard. Rick scoffs, though his confidence wavers. I was just doing my job. Jacob leans forward slightly. Number, your job is to lead. Your job is to ensure your staff is treated with respect, that your customers feel welcome, and that this diner runs as the family-friendly place I built it to be. His voice sharpens. Instead, you've created a toxic, hostile work environment where employees are terrified of making a mistake and customers leave with complaints. Rick's face twitches. With all due respect, Mr. Reed, you don't work in the trenches. You don't see what it takes to keep this place running? If I wasn't here, this whole operation would fall apart. Jacob exhales, shaking his head. That's where you're wrong. Rick's mouth opens, but Jacob doesn't let him speak. Your team is holding this place together in spite of you, not because of you. Megan is working herself to exhaustion, Connor is doing his best to keep things balanced, and the only thing you're contributing is making their jobs harder. Rick stiffens, his face darkening. Jacob holds up a hand, silencing him. Number, I've seen enough. You're fired. The words hang in the air, final and absolute. Rick blinks. His face drains of color. Wait, what? You heard me. Jacob's tone doesn't waver. Effective immediately. Rick laughs nervously, a desperate edge creeping into his voice. You can't just fire me. I've been running this place for 2 years. You need me. Jacob doesn't blink. No, I don't. Rick's breathing quickens. Look, I can do better, he stammers. I'll fix things, I swear. I'll treat the staff better. I'll handle complaints differently. Just give me another chance. Jacob tilts his head. Where was this attitude an hour ago, Rick? When Megan was breaking down? When customers were complaining? When Connor tried to defend her? He lets the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. You're not sorry. You're just scared because you got caught. Rick clenches his fists. This is a mistake, he hisses. You'll regret this. Jacob steps forward, lowering his voice. The only mistake I made was trusting you to run this place the way I built it. And that ends today. A knock on the door interrupts them. It swings open slightly, and Connor hesitantly pokes his head inside. Mr. Reed? His voice is cautious. There's, a bit of a scene happening out here. Jacob frowns and pushes past Rick, stepping out of the office and into the dining area. Megan is standing near the register, looking uncomfortable as a few customers whisper among themselves, eyes darting toward the office. The tension is thick. Everyone knows something is happening. Rick follows Jacob out, his face red with humiliation. Jacob turns to face the staff. Rick is no longer employed here, he announces simply. A hush falls over the room. Megan's eyes widen. Connor stares, caught between shock and cautious hope. One of the cooks peeks out from the kitchen. Wait, seriously? Jacob nods. Seriously. Rick glares at him. You'll regret this, Reed. Jacob doesn't flinch. Get your things and leave. Rick exhales sharply through his nose, his jaw clenched. He yanks off his apron, throws it onto the counter, and storms toward the exit. The entire diner watches in silence as he pushes through the doors and disappears into the parking lot. A long pause follows. Then, a slow clap. It starts with one customer, then another. A murmur of approval spreads through the room. Megan presses a hand to her chest, exhaling shakily. Connor looks like he's holding back a grin. Jacob turns to the staff. Things are going to change around here, he says firmly. And it starts today. For the first time since walking into this diner, he sees it. Relief. Hope. And he's about to prove that he means every word. The diner is quiet, the last customer long gone, the lights dimmed to a soft glow. The weight of the day lingers in the air, but something is different. Hope. Jacob sits across from Megan and Connor in a booth at the back of the diner. Both of them look exhausted but alert, their eyes filled with cautious curiosity. Jacob exhales, rubbing his temples. I've been distant, he admits, his voice softer than before. I trusted reports instead of my people. I should have been here sooner. Megan hesitates, glancing at Connor before speaking. I love working here, she says quietly. I love the customers. I love the job itself. But we just want to feel valued. Connor nods, his fingers tracing the edge of the table. I didn't plan to stay long, he admits, looking up at Jacob. But Megan and the others needed support. I couldn't just leave them to deal with it alone. Jacob listens, guilt settling deep in his chest. These weren't just employees, they were the backbone of his business, the ones keeping everything afloat while he sat in an office, oblivious. He straightens up. That changes today. Megan and Connor exchange glances. Jacob continues, his tone firmer now. Here's what's happening immediately. First, we're hiring a new manager, someone experienced, but also someone who knows how to lead with respect. Megan lets out a slow breath, as if she's been holding it in for months. For now, Jacob adds, I'm personally overseeing this diner. No more reports, no more secondhand information. I'll be here. Connor raises an eyebrow. Like, actually working here? Jacob smirks. Like, actually working here? Megan chuckles softly, shaking her head in disbelief. Second, Jacob continues, we're fixing the understaffing issue. You two have been running on fumes, and that stops now. We'll hire more employees so shifts are manageable. Connor leans forward. That would be incredible. Third, Jacob says, locking eyes with Megan. Breaks will be mandatory. No one is working 6-hour shifts without a moment to breathe. No more overworking. Megan swallows hard, emotion flickering in her eyes. Then Jacob smiles. And now, the best part. Megan and Connor sit up a little straighter. Jacob turns to Connor first. You stepped up when no one else did. You took responsibility, even though you didn't have to. That's leadership. He pauses, then nods. You're now the assistant manager. Connor's jaw drops. Wait. What? Jacob chuckles. You heard me. Connor blinks. Me? But I've never managed before. You already have, Jacob says. You just didn't have the title. Now you do. Connor stares at him for a moment, his expression a mix of shock and pride. Wow. I don't even know what to say. Say yes. Jacob grins. Connor breathes out a laugh. Yes, absolutely yes. Then Jacob turns to Megan. You've been here for 8 months, keeping this place together when you shouldn't have had to, Jacob says. That kind of dedication deserves recognition. Megan's breath catches. I'm giving you a raise, Jacob says simply. Megan gasps. Wait. What? A raise? Jacob nods. And more than that, I want to set up a bonus system for staff. So when people go above and beyond, like you have, they get rewarded. Megan presses a hand to her mouth, her eyes shimmering. I don't know what to say. Jacob smiles. Just keep being you. Megan lowers her hand and whispers, "Thank you." For the first time in a long time, she feels seen. Connor leans back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. "Man, this is actually happening, huh?" Jacob nods. "It is. The diner may have been broken, but tonight, it has started healing. And everything is about to change." Jacob Reed wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a leader who had reclaimed his business from the inside out. For the next few weeks, he lived up to his word. No more sitting in a corporate office relying on reports. He rolled up his sleeves and worked side by side with his employees, learning firsthand what needed to change. Denise, the new manager, arrived within days. She was sharp, experienced, and, most importantly, a leader who valued her team. It didn't take long for her to win the trust of the staff. She listened, made fair schedules, and ensured breaks were taken. Understaffing? Fixed. Jacob approved the hiring of new employees, bringing relief to the overworked staff. No more running between tables with no backup. No more skipped meals or exhaustion-fueled breakdowns in the kitchen. And the results? A complete transformation. Employees walked in with energy instead of dread. The stress that once hung over the diner like a storm cloud had lifted. People actually smiled now, genuine smiles, not the forced, tired ones Jacob had seen when he first arrived. Megan, once on the verge of breaking, was thriving. With her raise and the security of knowing she was valued, she carried herself with confidence. Customers noticed her warmth, her attention to detail. Connor, now assistant manager, embraced his new role. He had been unsure at first, but with Jacob's guidance and Denise's mentorship, he quickly grew into a leader. His instincts for teamwork and problem-solving made him invaluable. Customers felt the difference too. Service was faster, smoother. The warmth and friendliness that Jacob had built his brand on had returned. Complaints stopped rolling in. Instead, positive reviews began pouring in online. "The best service I've had in years. This place has changed so much. Whatever they're doing, it's working. Shout out to the amazing staff. They actually look happy to be here." Jacob watched it all unfold, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not just in the business, but in the people who made it great. Then, one afternoon, as he prepared to leave for the corporate office, Megan approached him by the door. She hesitated for a second before speaking. "I just wanted to say, this place feels different now." Jacob met her gaze, seeing the gratitude in her eyes. He smiled. That was the goal. Megan nodded, looking around the diner. "It's not just the pay or the changes. It's that we actually matter now." Jacob's chest tightened slightly. That was the real lesson he had learned. This was never just about a business. It was about people, and he would never forget that again.